Foundationalism is an ancient method of reasoning, promoted largely by Aristotle. This method is a way of reasoning based off of basic principles that are discerned as truth. These truths are seen as infallible, and so are the very framework that everything else finds stability on. From these truths, this framework, conclusions are drawn and built upon. With this methodology, there can be various fundamental principles that one uses to work from. An example of different framework principles are the empiricists. They say that only from sense experience can come knowledge. John Locke and David Hume were among this group. On the other spectrum are the rationalists, who say that only from reason can come knowledge of existent truth. Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, and Descartes were among these. Aristotle, to explain his reasoning, gives the example of the structure of a house. This symbolizes the same concept of the structure of his reasoning. A house having been built necessitates a foundation having been laid, and if a foundation has been laid, blocks must have been shaped beforehand. Although Aristotle uses this analogy to show that he is building conclusions from a solid foundation, Descartes uses it to show that he is tearing down all structures to fix the foundations that he saw as questionable.
Once the foundations of a building have been undermined, the rest collapses of its own accord. So I will go straight for the basic principles, on which all my former beliefs rested.
His method of doubt was to
set aside anything that admits the slightest doubt, treating it as though I had found it to be outright false.
Descartes had been deceived in the past, and this method was to create a way to be completely certain of the truths he concluded.
Like most philosophers, Descartes believes that we learn from our senses, but particularly Descartes believes that our senses can err. Starting from the foundations, Descartes recalls in his meditations that whatever he had accepted until now as most true had come to him through his senses, and that occasionally he found that they had deceived him. Having realized this, he takes the position that it is unwise to trust completely those who deceive even once. Though our senses may err, Descartes recognizes that we still learn through our senses. Here, he does not do away with the senses completely. He says it seems to be impossible to doubt that he is sitting by the fire, wearing a winter dressing gown, holding a piece of paper in his hands, all of which can only be known through our sense perception. Descartes bases his epistemology and what he knows by being able to know when he is awake or asleep. He shows that what his senses know when he is asleep is different from when he is awake. An issue that he finds is not being able to discern whether or not he is asleep. Thus, in his first meditation, he recalls that often in his dreams he has such thoughts as do madmen in their sleep, that he is convinced from events where he may be sitting by a fire in his dressing gown, when he is in reality lying undressed in bed. Thus, the sense perception which he received in his sleep deceived him. Further, in the first meditation, he recalls receiving knowledge when being awake. He says, "Yet right now my eyes are certainly wide open when I look at this piece of paper. I shake my head and it isn't asleep. When I rub one hand against the other, I do it deliberately and know what I am doing. This wouldn't all happen with such clarity to someone asleep." Mr. Lex Newman, the author of the article Descartes' Epistemology from the Stanford Encyclopedia, divides Descartes' theory of doubt into two: the one doubt undermines the judgment that I am presently awake, which he calls the now dreaming doubt. The other doubt undermines the judgment that I am ever awake. He calls this the always dreaming doubt. Truth, for Descartes, comes from God, but he is not sure that even God would not deceive him. But ultimately, Descartes supposes that some malicious, powerful, cunning demon has done all he can to deceive him, rather than this being done by God, who is supremely good and the source of truth. This demon keeps all external things as dreams, and therefore doubtful to him to believe. Mr. Lex Luhmann writes, famously, Descartes puts forward a very simple candidate as the first item of knowledge. This is Descartes' cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Since he cannot distinguish well whether he is awake or asleep, since he is deceived by some malicious, powerful, cunning demon, and most of what he knows is doubtful, Descartes asserts that the one thing he can know is that he exists, and this is because he thinks. Therefore, out of all things known, this is the first item of knowledge. The only thing he can be sure of is that he exists. And how does he know this? By thinking. Therefore, since he knows he exists by being able to think, he says, I think, therefore I am.
Descartes' desire and quest for absolute certainty, although laudable, was misguided from the beginning, because by choosing himself as the standard by which all truth is measured, he unwittingly named himself God, putting faith only in his own judgment. Although this was not his intent, being a devout Catholic, in his attempt to doubt or count as false everything that he knew, or at least thought he knew, his philosophy would inspire many to embrace skepticism and or atheism, which in truth was nothing more than self-idolatry. Without any malicious intent, our intellectual pride may gradually obscure anything outside of our immediate field of vision. Our perceived knowledge may serve as a looking glass by which to gaze upon our own reflection. Pride is the exaltation of self as an absolute standard of truth, goodness, and morality. It judges everything by itself, and for that reason, everyone else is a rival, particularly God. Pride makes it impossible to know God. If I know everything, then not even God can teach me anything. If I am filled with myself, then there is no place for God. It wasn't necessary for Descartes to doubt or count as false everything that had come before, thereby passing judgment, when the more reasoned response would have been to suspend judgment until such time that things became clearer. But Descartes needed to be consistent in his methodology, even when this meant thinking himself into a corner. Although Descartes mentions the possibility of an evil demon or God, he is apparently using this proposition as a tool in order to complete his goal, which is to prove without a doubt that there is a God. It should also be remembered that Descartes was not himself a skeptic. He merely wanted to discover God methodically as the irrefutable principle he already knew him, God, to be, in order to have a clearly defined first truth, or principle, from which to begin from. What can easily be overlooked is what Descartes is suggesting by proposing to doubt everything which is doubtable, without coming out and saying it, Descartes is stating that he can rightly discern what truth is and what is false. Generally speaking, we know the definitions of the words we use. It seems that Descartes is forgetting man's former affinity for common sense, or that which seems irrefutably self-evident. The idea of being, this being, precedes judgment of existence in order of material or subjective causality, and the judgment of existence precedes the idea of being in the order of formal causality. Descartes may have been a brilliant mathematician, but all the rules that may apply to that particular science cannot be applied universally to all other sciences, especially metaphysics, since they deal with different principles. As an aside, man may only understand math in light of material existence. Otherwise, what would you be counting? Maritain reminds us how the mind actually conceptualizes. It forms its first idea, that of being, while uttering its first judgment, of existence, and utters its first judgment while forming its first idea. Ultimately, Descartes' faith reminds him that man's journey is about remembering who he is. Do we recall when we last experienced joy? Real abiding joy? Not that happiness related to our fickle feelings that people often confuse for the real thing. I would bet dollars to donuts that it was some time during our childhood, some time before becoming jaded, when life wasn't about being cool, or developing and maintaining coping mechanisms. In order to persevere, one needs to recall wonder, that encouraging spark by which man discovers truth and through that recovers his philosophia, which was his in his oft-forgotten youth. That common sense which children whom experience loved seem to have in abundance, because in the deepest recesses of our soul we remember Eden, and we remember that we once said no to love himself, and we've been trying to articulate a yes ever since. If God exists, then not I, but he is the center, and this time not in relation to a certain particular perspective, like that in which each created subjectivity is the center of the universe it knows, but, speaking absolutely, and as transcendent subjectivity to which all subjectivities are referred. We know as children that pain and suffering are wrong, that we are princes and princesses, that mommy and daddy know everything, and that we're indestructible, and that we'll all live forever. Anamnesis, or recollection, is just a fancy way to say that we must remember what it means to be a child. For if I put the question to anyone whether he prefers to find joy in the truth or in falsehood, he does not hesitate to say that he prefers the truth, just as he does not hesitate to say he wants to be happy. The happy life is joy based on the truth. This is joy grounded in you, O God, who are the truth.